We've got our slides working, and there are so many volunteers in here this morning that make the place run, including some who just jumped in at last minute, and it takes some guts to help run the worship service because everybody's watching it. So could we just give them a quick hand? Thank you so much, you guys. In my life, I have often thought that the loneliest place to be is in a crowd. Anybody know what I mean? Yeah. I remember when my husband and I packed up our two kids, who were 6 and 9 back then, and we moved from Oregon to the East Coast. After barely scraping by in high school and struggling to make ends meet and spending a couple of years at a community college, I had gotten into Harvard Divinity School on a scholarship, the unexpected opportunity of a lifetime and a chance I would not dream of missing. But in order to take it, I had to leave behind a mother's support group that had become like an extended family to me. Best friends who were like aunties to my kids, and their kids were like cousins. My husband and I also left behind our sisters and the cousins who are their children, and my parents. We moved just about as far as you can go from Salem, Oregon, in the contiguous United States, all the way to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And when we got there, we were just like this little island for a while, with no real sense of community around us. One day I was at a playground near our new home, and I saw another woman, also in her 20s, with 2 kids, and she was really kind, and she had kind of a cute haircut, and she seemed close in age to me, which was kind of unusual because I had had my kids when I was very young. "That mama looks nice," I told my son. He had just finished kindergarten a couple of months earlier, and I guess he'd gotten the hang of forming new relationships there because he looked up at me and said, "Why don't you go up to her and ask her to be your friend?" What a good suggestion. It sounded so sweet and so easy. I wish grown-ups made friends the way kindergartners do, don't you? Instead, I introduced myself to her in that normal, reserved way that adults are supposed to, so we don't scare each other off. And she immediately informed me that she was not a parent, but a nanny, as was every other woman my age with children who I approached in that town. Which is fine, but it meant that we were having really different life experiences. I was not at home anymore, not geographically, not in the family norms of that place, not in social class. I was so grateful for my little family, but we were all homesick and we were all facing some loneliness. And although I felt so very lucky for the opportunity before us, our move also marked the beginning of a long time of not being sure where or if I belonged. At that big fancy school, I was always afraid of embarrassing myself, so I held back a lot. In my very first journal entry that fall, I wrote that I did not know what I was doing there, was not sure at all that I would make it through the year, and that I could not imagine having anything to say in a sermon. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke writes, "Let everything happen to you. Just keep going. No feeling is final." Let everything happen to you. Just keep going. No feeling is final. I felt lonely in the crowd. Belonging is the desire to be part of something larger than ourselves, and it is a deeply primal desire, and it is so painful when it's unmet. The need to belong is human. It's baked into our DNA. It's a survival skill. I don't just mean that we needed our tribes to fend off saber-toothed tigers in prehistoric times. We need belonging for survival as much now as we did back then. Studies show that loneliness is linked with high blood pressure and heart disease and cognitive decline and premature death even. Some researchers have compared the health impact of loneliness to that of heavy smoking. There were a lot of news stories and internet articles repeating that this year with headlines like, "Loneliness is the new smoking." Loneliness is not the same as solitude. We can be alone without feeling lonely. And we can feel lonely without actually being alone. That's why sometimes the loneliest place is a crowd. It's lonely if you're there without a sense of true belonging. But what is this true belonging? Well, I'll tell you what it's not, first of all. True belonging is definitely not the same as official membership. You don't get it from joining a club or even from joining a church, at least not automatically. That is a kind of belonging, but it's a technical kind rather than an emotional or spiritual kind. The emotional or spiritual kind have to do with feeling connected on a deeper level than here's your membership card. And true belonging is also not the same as fitting in. Belonging and fitting in sound similar, but they're not. Fitting in is something that's observable from the outside. It might not correlate with how somebody feels on the inside. A person can pass as a member of a group without feeling like they really are one. We might consciously try to fit in somewhere by changing our look or our clothing or our manner of speech, by hiding some part of who we are, or by pretending to love kale or kombucha. We might consciously try to fit in, and we might succeed at fitting in, but that does not mean we'll experience a sense of belonging. In fact, the more we depart from our authentic selves to try to fit in, the less likely we are to experience a meaningful sense of belonging. No offense to kale and kombucha, by the way. I do like them. I just don't blame you if you don't. Okay. The social science researcher Brené Brown explains that fitting in and seeking approval are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but they're actually often barriers to it. That's because whenever we put up a front or we contort ourselves to match the people around us, what happens is that our true selves are not accepted. The modified version is accepted, and that leaves the true self feeling disconnected. When we put up a front or we contort ourselves to match the people around us, our true selves are not accepted. A modified version is, and that leaves the true self disconnected. We might be afraid that if we were to show up fully as our true selves, we would be laughed at or scorned or rejected. The personal belief that deep down you might not be acceptable or lovable as you are is the first barrier to true belonging. It's not the only barrier, but it's a big one, the first one. Because no matter what else is happening, if we don't love and accept ourselves, we will have a very difficult time, maybe an impossible time, believing that others genuinely love or accept us. If we don't love and accept ourselves, how can we have confidence that someone else does? Because if we don't love and accept ourselves, then what it means is that on a deep level, we somehow believe we are unlovable and unacceptable. I hope that many of us here this morning are already there, and you have a deep sense of self-acceptance and love. One time when I was sitting among a circle of friends who were talking about struggles with self-esteem, the most well-adjusted friend among us said to everyone else, "I don't understand why anybody would doubt for 1 minute that they're lovable and acceptable just as they are. It seems obvious that I'm lovable and acceptable and that you are too." She was genuinely perplexed, right? Which actually was pretty good for the rest of us, self-esteem-wise. I am so happy for those of us who are here this morning who feel as my well-adjusted friend does. And if you feel that way, you're correct. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. For the rest of us, well, I get it. We have not all experienced, for example, the blessing of unconditional love from parents or family, which so helps to pave the way for self-acceptance. We're steeped in toxic cultural messaging about who is normal and who's acceptable and who is not. We're scared. Some of us carry a heavy weight of shame or regret with us in our lives. And some of us live with a truly abusive, tyrant. I am talking about that self-critical voice you might have in your own head. Negative self-talk. I get it. And this is a Universalist church, a Unitarian Universalist church, which means that I believe, and actually I know for a fact that you are inherently worthy and lovable and acceptable. No, but. You just are. I know you mess up sometimes. You do. I do. We've got some rough edges, and we have some hopes or goals for ourselves we have not met. We have to keep our instincts and our egos in check with our more thoughtful, loving selves, and we don't always nail it. We're still learning. That is part of what makes our lives interesting and rich and a sacred gift. But who you are deep down, the way you are made, the way you are wired, the body you have, it's all good. Amazing, even. As is. You are lovable and acceptable. You are worthy, and no matter how big your failures, you are also redeemable. Full stop. I like the way Shunryu Suzuki put it. He helped bring Buddhism to the West, and he's credited with founding the very first Zen monastery outside of Asia. Shunryu Suzuki said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. Being imperfect does not mean being unacceptable. You are acceptable and lovable and worthy just as you are. I worked in a men's maximum security prison, so if you think something about you would make me change my mind, try me, okay? Just try me. Brené Brown says, "Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance." Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. But it can be so scary to do that, right? To present our authentic, imperfect selves. And Brown speaks of that time in which we first embrace our authentic selves as wilderness. She says, "Belonging so fully to yourself that you're willing to stand alone is a wilderness. It's an untamed, unpredictable place of solitude and searching. It's a place as dangerous as it is breathtaking, a place as sought after as it is feared. That wilderness can often feel unholy because we can't control it or what people think about our choice of whether to venture into that vastness or not. But it turns out to be the place of true belonging," she says, "and it's the bravest and most sacred place you will ever stand." Self-acceptance, belonging to yourself. That's the first part. And then there's another thing, which is social context. Belonging first to ourselves is crucial, and you can't get to the second part, true belonging among others, without it, at least not fully. But what happens next is you might find the place that you belong right away. Maybe not so much wilderness for you, just a little bit. Maybe it'll turn out that you belong with the people and the environment you were in already after all. It just took that chance to see it. Or maybe a subset of that group, a group within the group that when you stop trying to fit in and you start being real, they all go, "Oh, thank God," right? And then they find the courage to do the same. Or it might take a while. That's the wild part. That's the part that can be scary. Some communities create cultures of belonging, and some are more concerned with fitting in and with who fits in. Most groups actually have both aspects, though. For example, a group that comes together around a love of diversity and tolerance, in that group, a wide range of people could probably experience a sense of belonging there, but a person who is firmly committed to the idea that, say, tall people have been cursed and are bad luck to be around would probably not enjoy that group's gatherings very much. Right? I like tall people too. As a religion, Unitarian Universalism is a big tent, but nothing will appeal to absolutely everybody. The UU minister Meg Riley wrote an article in UU World a while back. UU World is the magazine of our denomination. And in her article, she lists 10 beliefs that might make someone feel like they don't belong in our otherwise theologically diverse congregations. And they're kind of interesting to reflect on as we think about what kind of place this is and on the balance or the tension between belonging and fitting in. For example, she writes, belief number 1 is, God wrote it, I read it, that settles it. Okay. She explains that UUs are more focused on questioning and exploring than on settling things. And UUs also don't tend to believe that God wrote down some words and not others. So if you believe things have been settled by God once and for all, a UU church probably won't be a comfortable spiritual fit. Belief number 2, she wrote, there's only one right way and many wrong ways to understand what is holy, precious, and true. Again, UUs value openness, and we embrace that there are many paths to what's holy, precious, and true, so that belief probably wouldn't feel like a fit. Belief number 7, she puts out there, God has created a natural order, and traditional families and gender roles reflect that order. Oh, for Christ's sake. Right? We think differently here, okay? There are lots of ways to make and be a family, lots of ways to be a person of any gender. Belief number 6. Spirituality has no connection to the world of politics. Right. I know. I like how Meg Riley puts her answer to that. She writes, of course, we don't get into the business of electoral politics or supporting candidates. But we are a community of activists related to our values, supporting marriage equality, protecting the earth, standing up for human rights for people regardless of economic status, immigration status, physical and mental ability, gender identity, and every other descriptor used to dehumanize or ignore people. She concludes, you'll find a disproportionate number of activists here. I think that sounds about right. By the way, I'll include a link to her article in the online version of this sermon if you want to read the rest of it. So every community has its values, and some people will connect with them while others may not. So what does it mean to be a people of belonging rather than a people of fitting in, right? Knowing that that thing is true also. Here's the thing. Meg Riley's article is called A Candid Welcome. And at first it might seem like the opposite of a welcome, right? A list of things that might lead someone not to stay. But actually, what it is it's an example of a group doing what Brené Brown says individuals have to do, which is being authentic about who they are and what they believe. Just as an individual has to be able to share their authentic self in order to experience true belonging, a group and the people in it should also be authentic about itself and their selves. Putting on a front about who's there and what's it about, that won't create a culture that values belonging. A culture that values belonging also values authenticity. So that's the first thing. But what's also important is that we don't make assumptions about other people. So we're not the judges of who could develop a sense of belonging here and who could not. In other words, we don't share our authentic selves as a way of drawing a line to show somebody that they're out, right? We don't pull out Meg Riley's article and hand it to everybody who walks in the door looking a little bit different. That's not how we do it. Instead of drawing lines that keep people out, First Unitarian's about really creating a circle that invites people in, that celebrates diversity, and it trusts people to know what's a fit for them and what's not. I want to close with a quick story today. It's related to the way we have created that inviting circle. It's about a person who died almost exactly 1 year ago, a man who was named Bob, and he was part of our congregation. Bob retired to Albuquerque in 2008 after working for 35 years as a desk clerk on the graveyard shift at the Casino Royale in Las Vegas. Talk about a place where you meet a wide variety of people, right? After all those years in Vegas, Bob still smoked 3 packs a day. In New Mexico, he liked fishing and he liked going into the countryside. He was a big history buff, but he was not big into politics or social justice issues. He kind of kept to himself in that way. He lived very frugally. His couch was actually held together by bungee cords. That's how frugally. Okay? And he was, by his closest relatives' account, kind of a loner who only had a few friends. And those friends, though, were mainly from First Unitarian. In fact, Bob told his closest relative that if it hadn't been for this congregation, Bob didn't think he would have had a community at all. I did not have a chance to get to know him personally. In fact, nobody on the church staff did, and if you knew him personally, I'd really like to talk with you. I'd like to learn more about him, because he also did something very unexpected. This place was so important to him that when Bob died last September at the age of 76, he left a big portion of his estate to First Unitarian. And his $160,000 bequest is the largest gift our little endowment has ever gotten. It's huge. Yeah, you can do that. An endowment plays a really important role in the life of a church. It's not the same as the operating budget that I was just talking about. The operating budget is what we are raising all these pledges for. An endowment is different. It's like a safety net for the future of the congregation. So in some future year, if First Unitarian faces a big crisis due to something in the larger economy, or if we experience a disaster of some sort, the endowment is what's there to help ensure that this place is able to keep going. So Bob's gift to the place that he belonged helps ensure that there's going to be a place for others to belong to also, especially when times are tough, no matter what. And I just think that's such a beautiful story, so I wanted to share that with you. Let us give thanks for his generosity and others by each paying it forward in our own way, through acts of kindness and through self-acceptance, through authenticity, and through generosity of spirit. May it be so. Let's sing.
I invite you to rise and bow to your spirit. We're going to have the words up on the wall for Draw the Circle Wide. The chorus comes up a couple times. Before you sing this part, Tanya's going to sing a verse that's similar but not quite the same. We'll tell you when it's time to come in.